Well, Nigeria's inflation rate slowed in September 2025, offering cautious optimism for the economy as the International Monetary Fund raised its growth forecast for the country. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, inflation eased to 18.02% in September, down from 20.12% in August, driven mainly by a decline in food and transport costs. The slowdown comes as the Central Bank of Nigeria maintains its tightening stance to consolidate gains against price pressures. Meanwhile, the IMF has upgraded Nigeria's growth outlook, projecting the economy to expand by 3.9% in 2025 and 4.2% in 2026, citing improvements in oil output, fiscal reforms, and resilient non-oil sectors. Analysts, however, warn that sustaining this momentum will require consistent macroeconomic reforms, stable foreign exchange management, and targeted support for productive sectors. Joining me now to give an in-depth analysis of these from our Lagos studio is the Head of Research, Sterling Asset Management and Trustees Limited, Dr. Patrick Ejumedia. Thank you so much for joining on Arise Exchange this evening.
Good evening, Georgina. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now let's start by looking at these new inflation figures now at 18.02%. For September, really reflecting, does it really reflect the reality of Nigerians, how they are feeling every day?
And so that's a question that we've been getting, right since when the data for the September inflation came out. But I think for people to begin to know whether it is reflective or not, it's better to get some perspective about it. Now, if you understand where we are coming from as to the rebasing and the reason for the rebasing, and again, you will then look at what then happened after the rebasing and what is happening now, vis-a-vis what is the misconception about what inflation is, then one will be able to understand whether it means something, it means what it means for Nigeria. Now, so if you think what happened was that, there was a rebase, and the rebase was to say that our consumption pattern has changed. And because consumption pattern has changed, there was a rebase that took us to 2024, where prices now went, inflation rate now went to as high as over 30%, if you can remember. Now, but now, what have you seen? Prices are now beginning to ease. So what does that mean? It means that if you are buying a bag of rice for, say, 50,000 naira, say yesterday, and today there was, say 2 days ago, you bought a bag of rice for, say, 50,000, and yesterday there was inflation of 20%. That bag of rice will go to 60,000 because 20% is about 10,000 naira. Now, then today, the inflation has now come down to 18%. What that means is that the bag of rice will go to 70,800 instead of 72,000. So that's what it means. So it means that, yes, inflation is still high, 18% is still high, but it means that the pressure on consumers' budgets and income is still there, but it is actually easing.
Talk to us about this reported slowdown in inflation, and is there a possibility, or is it a sign of lasting stability?
Of course, if you see what is happening across the globe, most CBN, central banks across the globe are putting effort to remain committed towards bringing stability to inflation. And it's also very important that we state that because of the base year that was picked as 2024 that was picked as the base year, I doubt if we will ever get inflation rate that will get to 30% anymore. So what we are going to see is that continuous stability, and we can see the effort that this current CBN governor is putting towards ensuring that there's stability. So except there's except there's otherwise some external factors that can change the narrative, what we see is that projection and that stability in the rate of inflation.
All right, I know you've talked about prices easing now, but how will this, in the long term, impact the prices of food, fuel, and other essentials for ordinary Nigerians? Aside from food crops, you're taking a look at increase in fuel purchase, liter per liter, for people who want to fuel their cars. So, in the long run, how do we see this playing out?
So first is to get the perspective. For every discussion, if you get the perspective right, then it's usually very easy to then see what is going to happen in the long run. Now, what is happening now, because we are in the harvest season, we've seen some staple food, their prices would have gone down, except those processed food or imported food. So if you are buying imported food, for instance, or you are buying processed foods that are imported, you may not experience that significant decline in price, but if you are buying staple foods that are actually harvested, produced and harvested here in Nigeria, you will see that decline in price. Then again happens to oil, energy prices or fuel prices. Now, so what happened is that energy prices globally has dropped, and like we have all seen, then you now see the improvement that's also coming from Dangote refinery, which has also brought price of energy down as well. So what are you going to see in energy prices? You are going to see that prices of transportation may not go as high as they were again in 2024, but of course they still remain high. But in the long run, as price becomes stable, you will now begin to see that stability, that downward trend in food prices and then in energy prices.
Okay, let's take a look at IMF's projection. It's projecting stronger growth that is put at 3.9% next year and 4.2% in 2026. So what exactly do you think is fueling this optimism?
Yeah. So again, everything has a perspective. Where did IMF put Nigeria economic growth as at their last report? They put it at 3.2. And why did they put it at that? They put it because they were worried about what is going to happen to the reform. They were also worried that oil prices were going to drop beyond what we have put in our budget. But truly, yes, oil price dropped beyond what we put in the budget. But if you now see what is happening in terms of our production, it has also gone up. So somehow we are able to get some level of revenue from oil, export and all that. Then secondly, the reform, they've now beginning to see some level of stability in the reform. And they're also now seeing the non-oil sector also improving. And all these factors made them to then do a rethink, to then say, okay, with all of this happening, we are seeing the economy growing at a 3.9%. But what they've just basically did was to analyze what we have seen in Q2. So if you analyze what you have seen that the economy grew in Q2, which is about 4.23%, if you analyze it to say that we grow by the same rate in Q3 and Q4, if you analyze it and take the average, you will see that what the IMF did was to they analyzed that figure. Then they took the average to get a 3.9%. But of course, you would not be surprised if the Nigerian economy expands beyond that by the end of the year.
All right, so we're talking about expansion, but what about exchange rate swings, fiscal pressures? Can that growth momentum truly be sustained?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the direction of the swing. Of course, we've been seeing exchange rate appreciating in recent times. And of course, some level of stability and some level of appreciation that we have seen in the exchange rate. If it continues, what that will mean is that inflation is going to drop further. And if inflation drops further, it means that the CBN will cut rates. And once they cut rates, borrowing costs too will also go down. And once borrowing costs goes down, it means there will be increased production and expansion will be there. But if it happens the other way around, then we begin to see that. So exchange rate swing depends on the direction. If it's a positive direction, like I've said, like in the analysis I just gave, it will bring some level of growth, and then that growth will then be sustained. So what is very paramount now is the effort that the government is going to be putting to ensure that the stability that we are enjoying in the macroeconomic environment now continue to remain. And if that continues, then we'll see that sustainability in the growth rates.
In your view, do you think that the central bank should begin to rethink its monetary policy stance as inflation is showing signs of easing?
I think they've already started now. We saw the last meeting that they had. They had a 50, a cut in the rate and all that. So they've already started. I think, and that's why if you check the next meeting that the central bank is going to hold is around November. And I think the reason for that is for them to be able to take some numbers and study what will happen, after the rate cut. And by the time they begin to see the impacts, and they see inflation coming down further, then they can then begin to do a second rate cut towards the end of the year. But I think that's why there's this long gap between when they did the last cut and the next meeting that they are going to have. So, of course, they've started the rate cut already.
All right, so I want you to give Nigerians some form of hope as to when they should actually start feeling in true terms, in real terms, the benefits of lower rates, lower prices rather, better jobs, and real relief?
No, of course, the answer is simple. If once, for now, because inflation is currently around 18%, like I said earlier, is kind of still high. But once we're able to hit single-digit inflation, then we will now begin to see that impact. And of course, once we're able to now grow the economy, because the African Development Bank has said that for an economy to begin to, for the impact of economic growth to trickle down to the people, that economy should have, in Africa, should have at least between 6 and 7% growth, or a double-digit growth. So, of course, we'll be seeing those things happening, let's say, between second quarter next year, because by then we would have been able to see inflation coming down to around single digit, and would have been able to see growth rate in the Nigerian economy hitting around that 5 and 6%. Then we would then begin to feel this impact, as citizens of the country.
Thank you so much for your great insights, Dr. Patrick Ejumedia, Head of Research, Sterling Asset Management and Trustees Limited. Do have a lovely weekend.